What is the problem with hero shooters? It's the tanks. Tanks are the problem. Both Overwatch and Marvel Rivals put way too much responsibility and power into the tank role that should ideally be split amongst all of the players in the game. But before we could talk about why tanks are a problem, we have another more important question to answer, which is there a problem here at all? I mean, Overwatch and Marvel Rivals are both very successful games. And you'd be right to say that. From a certain perspective, there isn't a problem at all. But that's only from one perspective. If you know just about anything about hero shooters, you'll know that tanks have been central to many controversies in the space. People are still arguing in Overwatch about the difference between the 5v5 format and the 6v6 format. I can say personally from my experience with the games, I can never find anyone to play tank in Marvel Rivals, and tank queues in Overwatch are way shorter than every other queue. The fact is that not many people want to play tank, and it seems as if a lot of the community wants there to be less tanks in the game. And the question I want to answer here today is why? Why are tanks such a hot button issue in hero shooters? Now, there are a lot of different perspectives you could come at this from, but I really do think that the inherent idea behind tanks in games like Overwatch is a problem. Or at least, you can't design tanks in a game like Overwatch without inevitably getting these sorts of problems cropping up. So, to understand this, we're going to have to talk about how the three main roles in hero shooters work. But before that, I do want to make a couple of quick disclaimers. Mainly, I am not good at any of the games I'm going to be talking about today. And as a result of that, my understanding of them is imperfect. Do not take anything I say in this video about any game I speak about as gospel. And if anyone knows these games better than me, I'd highly appreciate hearing down from you below in the comment section. However, I don't think that the design issues I'll be highlighting require you to be particularly skilled at any of these games to notice. Basically, I don't think my skill level will matter in the broad strokes of the ideas I'm presenting, but it will definitely matter for the details, and the big picture could still be better elucidated by better players. So, the three main roles in hero shooters are DPS, tank, and healer. Don't come at me saying that support and healer isn't the same thing. We all saw what happened with Symmetra. The most normal of the bunch from an FPS perspective are the DPS heroes. These guys are the most similar to the types of characters you'll see in most other shooter games, as their main focus is just securing kills. Now, it's important to realize that it's specifically securing kills that we're focusing on, not just dealing damage. Ironically, DPS characters don't always actually have the best damage per second of the roster in these games, but they will have other tools that are meant to help them do their job. For a good example, look at Genji from Overwatch. His actual damage per second isn't that impressive, but he does have very good burst damage if you're able to combine his dash ability with shuriken right clicks and melees. Combine this with his incredible mobility, his dash resetting on eliminations, and his deflect allowing him to duel other heroes better, or honestly just helping him get out of a bad spot if he gets caught out while on a flank, and Genji is set up to go out and secure kills on flanks very easily. He will be dealing less overall damage than a character like Maga, who just sits there and shoots the enemy tank, but Genji should still be putting up more elims in the average game by using his mobility to pick the backline or to just find advantageous duels. In general, DPS characters will have tools in their kit that not only let them deal high damage, but also to make sure that those kills stick in some way. Supports are mainly there to heal their teammates. Now, the exact role that supports fill depends on the exact support, and while they all heal, they heal for different amounts. Supports will usually focus on healing and providing some other sort of value to the team in some other way, though what that extra value is depends on which support you're talking about. For example, Mercy can either heal or damage boost her teammates, helping them stay alive or get kills more easily. She has res to keep her teammates alive if they get picked, and has mobility that's based on her teammates to help her do her job and to escape bad situations. Then you have Zenyatta, who has a healing orb that does less than stellar healing output, but doesn't require constant line of sight to be active, letting Zenyatta put it on flankers or DPS going off on an off angle to keep them alive. He also has pretty high damage output for support, and he has a Discord orb which debuffs an enemy, letting the entire team deal even more damage to them. Zenyatta does have a lot of high damage options and can get kills. However, he doesn't have the best self-defense options or mobility. Compared to mid to long range DPS characters like Cassidy with Flashbang and Fan the Hammer, Soldier's Run and Healing Field, Ashe with her Coach Gun for movement and a boop, and you'll see that Zenyatta can't afford to be as risky with his positioning thanks to not having any good disengage options, nor ways to get into position faster in the first place. Zenyatta can put out meaningful damage, but he's generally worse at securing kills than DPS heroes. He offers sustain as well as extra damage for the whole team, with some pick potential to help the team set up a strong offense. Still, he's not gonna bail you out of your mistakes the way someone like Kiriko can with a Suzu. The point here is that supports can generate some extra form of utility for their team outside of just healing. Now, finally, we have Tank. Tanks are designed to take space. They do this in a few ways, the most obvious being in the form of massive shields and high health pools. A Reinhardt standing on a point may not accomplish that much, but unless his positioning is just truly awful, it's going to take a bit for an enemy team to burst him down. This should give the rest of his team time to deal damage or find better positioning. Of course, not every tank has a big ass shield to protect their team, and even some that do, like Winston, just don't play the same way as Rein. Other tanks will try to take space in a variety of ways. Less standard tanks, like Wrecking Ball and Hazard, rely less on blocking damage and more on annoying the enemy team by rotating around the map with high survivability and mobility. This allows them to either dive the enemy backline and try and secure kills, or constantly threaten to do that and therefore create more space for their team. And then you have tanks like Maga and Junker Queen, who create space by, I guess, just dealing a lot of damage and being really hard to kill. There's not really anything else to say about them. Like, they have some CC elements in their kit and some other utility, but like, so do a lot of other characters, even in the DPS category. Really, the main thing these tanks offer is being a fat DPS who trades off some mobility and pick potential for being really, really hard to kill. And this is where the problem with tanks begin. This category of tank reveals a larger issue that the tank role generally has. A lot of the time, tanks are just DPS characters, but better. The most egregious example of this has to be Roadhog. Anytime this guy has been viable, it's been as a pick character who just happens to have 600 plus HP. Now, I know people will bristle at this example. Roadhog is considered a poorly designed tank by a lot of the community. But the problem people have with Roadhog is generally not something that matters for this example. The issue people have with Roadhog is that he just one-shots you, which is annoying. People currently call Roadhog just a fat DPS, but if we just removed the one tap and gave him some other form of utility that was equally valuable, why would that change him from being a fat DPS into something else? And pertinent for our purposes, if we have tanks that are just fat DPSs and you don't have something like roll queue preventing you from selecting certain heroes, why would you not just play more fat DPSs? Now, the answer to that question is very context specific, but people did do this at certain points in the game. The most famous has to be GOAT's meta, when people just decided to play 3 tanks and 3 supports together, and it just beat everything. This was such a big problem, and it was a problem that went unsolved for so long thanks to how stubborn the Overwatch balance team was, that a lot of people think this is why roll queue was introduced to the game in the first place. Now, before you go typing up a storm in my comment section, I do know that GOATs happened because of Brig more specifically, and it wasn't any 3 tanks, it was a specific team comp, and yada yada yada. All of that is worth pointing out, but it's not what I'm trying to highlight here. I'm talking more specifically about the design problems that the tank role creates. Yes, GOATS was a specific team comp during a specific metagame, but things like it have happened in other hero shooters. Things like it likely would have repeated had role queue not been implemented, and generally speaking, the idea that playing more tanks is better has shown up in so many other places in these games. Even if you look at the recent 1-3-2 queue experiment, most people reported that getting one of your DPS flex spots to play tank was better than playing 3 DPS like 99% of the time. There's a reason why you were only allowed to play 2 tanks max in that experiment and couldn't have your DPS players flex to more than 2 of them. The problem is with how the tank role is defined. The way they're designed makes this type of problem something you have to specifically design around in hero shooters. To explain why this is the case, let's use a naive example. Before I begin, I want to stress the fact that this is a naive example and that I know that this is not how the game works. So like, most of the time, if one DPS tries to duel one tank, the tank is going to win. There are times that this isn't the case. Ryan can get outranged by certain DPS, and Winston isn't great into Reaper, but this does generally hold true. So, extrapolating from this, if tanks win most 1v1s in a 6v6 game, why not just play all tanks and treat the game as 6 separate 1v1s instead? Well, there are a few reasons for this, but like the biggest one is that the enemy team will have enough counterplay that they can simply poke you out and use your lack of sustain to kill you. So we switch a tank for one support, but that doesn't really fix the problem yet. One support simply can't keep 5 tanks healthy. They don't have enough healing for it. So we add more supports until, hey, look at that, 303, the team comp that proved to be a problem in the past. Out of 6 players, this is the only combination of tanks and supports that both let you have more tanks than average and enough supports to actually sustain your tanks, at least if the support's healing is high enough. The thing about tanks is that while their high HP pool is great, most of the time, even stacking 3 supports won't give you enough healing to offset the increased need for healing that 3 tanks demand. Adding a DPS instead makes this a complete non-issue. Not only do DPS have smaller health pools and therefore take less resources to keep healed, but a lot of DPS are a lot more self-sufficient and will use up less of the team's resources to execute their game plan in the first place. The GOATS issue is a problem that arises specifically from the interaction between tanks and supports. If supports have healing that's too high, or in the inverse case, damage is too low and supports can therefore out-heal it, then you're incentivized to use heroes that can best take advantage of that healing. Some people may take issue with calling this a tank problem and say that the fault lies more with the support role. I disagree with this, mainly because we've seen healers or support type characters in shooters before, and they have in no way been problematic. However, we haven't seen too many shooters with tanks the way Overwatch designs them, and these are the games where this is becoming a problem. More importantly, I think what needs to be answered is why this is a problem in the first place. What design decisions are leading to these types of characters and these team comps coming into being? I would argue this is due to a fundamental issue in the way the roles of hero shooters like Overwatch are defined. Remember, the job of the roles are tanks create space, DPS secure kills, and support sustains the team and provides utility. The problem is that in shooter games, creating space is something every player can and should do. Creating space is how you win every objective-based mode in a shooter game. The goal of search and destroy, or payload, or capture point, or any other objective-based mode is literally to take control of a certain area of the map for a certain amount of time. Putting the responsibility of doing the most important thing you can do in a shooter on 1/3 of the roster not only unbalances the game, it just fundamentally changes how shooters work. To get into how this is a problem, we're going to need to talk about some other shooter games. Now, we could talk about Counter-Strike or Valorant, but those games really aren't parallels for hero shooters, or at least not the kind we're talking about here. They just work differently. The type of positioning you need to take, the very short and fast reactions, the control over sight lines, these are just things that work very differently. Sure, every player does control space, but that's mostly because stepping into another player's LOS will just get you killed a lot of the time. A much better example to use here is the granddaddy of the entire subgenre, Team Fortress 2. In TF2, you have 9 classes that each have unique traits like move speed, health pool, and most importantly, weapon pools. There are different equipable weapons for each class, but they don't really change the goal of most of the classes, with the exception of Demo Knight, I suppose. While the classes don't really work the same way as Overwatch heroes do, this is probably the shooter that feels the most like Overwatch without, being Paladins or Marvel Rivals, or another game in the same genre with the exact same design philosophy. It's the closest parallel we have without just going down the same design road. Now, while teamfights don't work the same way as they do in Overwatch, they do have a similar shape. You have a front line and a back line. You even have a lot of the same modes like capture points, King of the Hill, and payload. The thing is, the way that TF2 classes take and hold space is a lot different to Overwatch. The most comparable thing is Heavy, the tankiest character in the game at a huge 300 HP. For comparison, the second highest is Soldier at 200. Then there are a couple of characters with 175, Medic has 150, and everyone else is a squishy at 125 HP. So you're tanky, but your health isn't as much of an outlier as a tank's health in Overwatch is. Heavy is also very slow, with the slowest walk speed in the game and basically no movement tech, and his gun requires revving before you can shoot it. While revved, you're even slower. In exchange for all of this, you get a hit-scan weapon that deals some of the best DPS in the game at most ranges and does not require reloading. On top of that, it's very important to remember how Medic, the only healer in the game, functions. His medigun not only heals people, but it gives them overheal, which decays if he stops healing them. The overheal you can get is equal to half of your base HP, so Heavy benefits the most from it, going up to a staggering 450 HP when fully overhealed. All of this makes pushing into a Heavy very difficult, but you can do it. You just have to play smart and play to your class's strengths and play around his weaknesses. Heavy can only focus on one target at a time, and while he does have high DPS, he doesn't have much burst or the ability to chase. Heavy makes certain sightlines and areas of the map very difficult to walk into, making areas no-go zones for individual players. This lets the rest of Heavy's team go for flanks or push forward while having an area of relative safety to retreat to. Now, this may sound very similar to how a tank in Overwatch works, but there's one very big difference. Every class in the game can duel a Heavy and win. Well, except Medic, but Medic's entire thing is that he's ass at fighting people. There are some lopsided matchups here and there, of course, but if you're playing in your preferred range and you play to your strengths and away from Heavy's weaknesses, one person can easily kill one Heavy. This means that while Heavy can create space, he can't create and hold space on his own. He relies on the rest of his team playing well to get anything done. Or, in other words, the impact that a Heavy playing well has on the game is equal to the impact that any other class playing well has on the game. Except for, like, Spy at high level, I guess, because Spy's kind of ass. Another class that excels in map control in a very obvious way is Engineer. Engie can put up a turret that deals big damage, a dispenser which gives people ammo and heals them, and teleporters to get people around the map. Importantly, level 3 turrets in TF2 are way more dangerous than turrets in like any other hero shooter. They deal huge damage, and if you just try to W key at them, they will shred you. However, they have limited range and have a delay before they start firing when you enter their line of sight. So what you have to do is peek a corner and shoot them, then dodge their attack, wait for them to look away, and rinse and repeat this until the turret is dead. Of course, doing that is a lot easier said than done. That might sound kinda broken, and yeah, level 3 turrets are a huge pain in the ass. The thing is, building a level 3 turret on Engie takes a lot of time. You have to wait for a building animation, put 200 metal into it, which is a resource you have to gather from ammo packs or the resupply, wait for an upgrade animation, put another 200 metal into the turret, and then wait for another upgrade animation. For the record, you put 25 metal into a turret at a time, and each time takes an entire melee hit. So you have to hit it 16 times to upgrade it all the way to level 3. Oh, and by the way, you do have to upgrade all 3 of your different building types to level 3. The point here is that you just can't set up turrets quickly as Inji. Even the most efficient building will take quite a long time to set up a turret and a dispenser, so you have to set them up behind the fight. You can carry them forward after building them, but your buildings are left vulnerable for a time while doing this as they rebuild and re-upgrade themselves. This, combined with the fact that sentries are pretty exploitable, especially by explosive classes, means that Inji has to set up his buildings very defensively. What Inji effectively does in a game of TF2 is secure a backline. He gives you a dispenser that gives you health and ammo to retreat to whenever you need to heal up, and that area is going to be secured by a sentry that is going to take the enemy team a lot of time to getting rid of. However, I think the most important difference in how holding space in TF2 works versus other games are the explosive classes, Soldier and Demo Man. Soldier's rockets do lots of damage and have splash damage. Demo Man's grenades also have both of these attributes, but don't have any fall-off damage at higher ranges. And his sticker grenades let him set up traps or just make areas difficult for the opponents to walk on. As a result of these attributes, something you will almost always see in a game of TF2 is a ton of explosive spam down chokes. Someone will be shooting grenades or stickies or rockets at the enemy team at basically all times. This isn't like a great strategy. It won't win the game on its own, but it does mean walking down main with no backup is a great way to instantly die. This encourages flanking and taking off angles to push, or using cover and waiting for the right time when the enemy is reloading after spamming, or just playing to the map, rather than having a class that you can select that instantly reshapes the map in your favor if things aren't going your way. I think it's very easy to see the difference when you look at how these classes were translated to Overwatch, because they definitely were. Junkrat is basically just Demo Man, and Pharah is basically just Soldier. Everyone knew this as soon as they laid eyes on these characters when Overwatch came out. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. These are very common weapon types in shooter games. It makes sense that they draw from the same well. But you could really see why these games feel so different to play when you compare how these characters work in their respective games. You can't spam down a choke with Pharah or Junkrat and expect things to work out like you can in TF2. I mean, that's not all you're going to be doing on Soldier or Demo Man anyway, but the amount of pressure it creates, the amount of space it takes to just throw explosives at the enemies and make certain areas of the map hard to walk in, it's night and day. There are a lot of reasons why this strategy doesn't carry over into Overwatch, but a huge one is the existence of tanks. Tanks have way too much health for the spam to really threaten them, and they either have options that will completely nullify the damage or even punish you for trying to spam damage mindlessly at them in the first place. Getting back to TF2, every class in the game also either contributes to taking space or plays around that space in a meaningful way. Pyro has air blast to blow back projectiles, his flare guns can contribute to spam and long-range poke damage, and his flamethrower allows him to ambush players around corners very effectively on flanks. Scout takes advantage of the frontline-backline distinction and uses his movement to flank and find duels. Spy infiltrates backlines and can shut down buildings with his sapper to help for pushes, and Sniper exists to make the game less fun. The point of going through all of this is to explain how space control is a team effort that requires multiple team members to work together, rather than the responsibility essentially being offloaded onto one role. And this has huge knockdown effects for the rest of the game as well. I mean, think about it. I just said that in hero shooter that's most similar to Overwatch without directly following in its footsteps, it takes active work from multiple different classes to effectively hold space. You need an NG to give you a base of operations to run to, demos and soldiers spamming sight lines to make them harder to traverse, heavies covering important areas of the map, and medics to keep all of these people alive. Compressing basically all of these jobs, except for the jobs of healing people and dealing damage, into exactly one role on the roster is going to force you to give that role very, very powerful toolkits, and it's going to make the game less balanced as a result. Now, the balancing is going to be contentious, because I'm sure you can argue from a certain way of looking at things that these games are technically balanced. But personally, I think any game in which one role has an inordinate amount of control over the outcome of the game is inherently unbalanced. You may recognize this scenario as the junglers in League problem. I've heard tank players in Overwatch and Rivals talk about how tank is the foundation of the team, and that without a good tank, you literally just can't win. They're just that important to how the game plays. I've also talked personally to tank players about what they enjoy about the role, and the feedback that I got from them was, I like how tanks control the flow of the whole match. And, maybe I'm taking this uncharitably, but to me, that sounds pretty much like saying, I like tanks because they're OP. And I know what you're going to say to that. You're going to talk about how playing tanks sucks and how everyone is mean to you and how it's super stressful, but that doesn't contradict what I'm saying. What I'm arguing is that tanks are over-centralizing. They make the entire game about them and what you do to answer them. Here's a really easy thought experiment to see how true this is. If you had to play 5v6 or 4v5 for a game and try to win, which role would you be most okay with having a player dip out from? DPS is probably the most common answer, and I'd wager tank would be the least common. In most hero shooters, the tanks define how the game plays out, and that's just not how it works in, say, TF2. But, like I said earlier, from a certain perspective, none of that is really a problem. In game design, there's basically never just one correct decision. The right design for one game may not be the right decision for another. If you'll forgive me, I want to take a quick diatribe to look at modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, this is a trading card game that is famous for being incredibly fast. Every deck can put enough attack on the board to win the game in a single turn, and decks are built around performing very powerful combos that put up multiple points of layered interaction on turn 1 to basically stop the opponent from even getting to play the game. It's very complicated and has an insanely high learning curve. And it's the type of game that some people really love, and that a lot of people will never want to play. It's very polarizing, and it's not necessarily a game for everyone, but the exact same things that turn certain players away from the game are also what makes it so fun for others. I think this is also applicable to Overwatch. As critical as I've been of tanks and how they impact the game, there are people who play tank in these games, and even non-tank players who probably enjoy the gameplay that the presence of tanks enable. I'm not here to argue that Overwatch and Marvel Rivals are just bad games and that everyone who likes them is a stupid idiot. That's not how opinions work. So why am I making this video then? What's the point? Well, there are a couple of things I want to say. I want to start by telling you guys a quick story. You see, when Overwatch first came out, I was a high schooler and I was enraptured with the game. I played it constantly, I played it all the time with my friends and family, and I had dreams of going pro in the game. I remember when the Overwatch League started and I was super pumped. I tuned in to watch it every single week. But over time, some cracks started to show. I remember GOATS meta happening and how just deflating it was. The more time went on, the more I played and the more I watched and the more time I spent listening to people who were better than me at the game talk about it, the more I realized that I just didn't like things about it. My opinion on tanks and how they warp the game in a way I don't like, that's not something I came up with recently. That's what made me leave the game before Overwatch 2 came out. And I gotta say, playing again more recently, 5v5, way more fun format. That's right, motherfuckers, I'm the person that made the switch for it. It was made to appeal to me. I say that jokingly, but it is worth pointing out that that didn't make me keep playing Overwatch. I went back to Overwatch after Overwatch 2, like years later, and I did bounce off it again because even though tanks are less impactful now and they don't change as much of how the game plays, I still don't like how the game is warped around them. But I do love hero shooters. And that's because a new hero shooter has come out, or well, it hasn't come out yet, that has completely reinvigorated my love for the genre. That's right, boys, we deadlock posting. I fucking love this game. Like, it is consuming my life in a good way and in a bad way. I understand that was a long diatribe I went down, but there are a few key takeaways. The first, and this is just speculation on my part, but I think a lot of the problems that hero shooters have, a lot of the inner community discourse is caused by a lot of people who play Overwatch and Marvel Rivals being players like me. I think there are a lot of DPS and support mains who love hero shooters, but who don't want to play that kind of hero shooter. I ended up realizing that and leaving and then coming back once a game that more fit my interests came out. But for a lot of people, you know, if you aren't going to play Overwatch while you're waiting for Deadlock to come out, what are you going to play? I mean, I just stopped playing shooters, but if you don't want to stop playing shooters, you just have to keep playing Overwatch, right? Or Rivals. And on top of that, Deadlock isn't a game for everybody. It's a weird ass, like, hero shooter MOBA hybrid. A lot of people aren't weirdos like me who are going to want to play it. There are a lot of people who probably want to play a hero shooter that don't really want to play the type of gameplay that Marvel Rivals or Overwatch enable, but also don't want to play like Deadlock and don't want to play Valorant. They want something that's different, that's kind of similar to those, but that doesn't have the exact same type of gameplay. And if you're in that situation and you have to settle for whatever's closest, you're gonna try and force that game to be something that it's not. Or you have to be mature enough to realize that the game isn't going to be exactly what you want it to be, but let's be real, most people on the internet are not mature enough to realize that. This is kind of a crackpot theory for me, but I think a big problem that Overwatch and Marvel Rivals have with all the tank discourse is that there are so many people who just want to play a different game, but these games are the closest thing to the game they want to play that exists, and so they're trying to force these games to be more like the game that they want to exist. Does that make any sense? Does what I just said make any sense to anybody? Besides that crackpot theory, the other main thing I want to say with this video is that, like, you know, not every hero shooter has to be Overwatch but again, or any other game with a different coat of paint. People talk about how the hero shooter market is really oversaturated and how difficult it is to break into the space. And that is true. But I think in addition to that, there's a problem with the way people are trying to break into it in the first place. People forget, but at the time of its release, Overwatch was a complete departure from what the rest of the shooter genre was doing. It was bold and innovative. It had a very clear identity, and it was very obvious that it was going to be something unlike anything you had played before. And to some extent, I think most of the successful hero shooters have had some of that in them. At the very least, they've had a very clear idea of what they want to be. Marvel Rivals is Overwatch, but goofier and sillier and more casual. Valorant is CSGO, but with hero shooters. Deadlock is a weird-ass MOBA hybrid thing that nobody asked for. Well, I asked for it, but nobody else asked for it, and now it's here and everyone loves it. The biggest failures in the hero shooter space, you know, Concord, Highguard, etc. The biggest problem with them, there were a lot of problems with them, a lot of things went into their failures, but the biggest one, I think, was just the lack of identity, at least one that could be gleaned from looking at them. If I show you any successful hero shooter, you could look at it and know why you want to play it. But if I show you Highguard, I mean, who the fuck wants to play this? Oh, Apex Legends, that's another hero shooter I forgot about. That's a game with teams of 3 in a battle royale, and each character has different abilities to help you and your teammates. It's instantly obvious why you'd want to play that. It has a very strong identity. A big part of why I wanted to make this video was just to make this point, and it's a simple one, but I think the biggest problem with breaking into the hero shooter space isn't that it's oversaturated, or that there are too many games, or that there isn't any room for anything else to succeed. I think there's a ton of room for games to succeed in this space, but you have to make a game that people actually want to play. That's really all I have to say for this video. I'm gonna do the ad read now. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment. I think I said comment twice. You can also become a member if you really like my stuff and you really want to support me. Members get access to all of my videos a full day early, and I read their names at the end of every single video. So, massive shout outs to Elric111, Agent B7, Joseph Florian, GB484, Atria, Bladed Fox 14, Shredding Pixels, and Robo Nerd.